That evening, Woolsey Hall at Yale University radiated with light, every seat filled with students, faculty, and guests attending the much-anticipated event, Unity for America's Future. On stage stood Robert Downey Jr., former cultural ambassador and global celebrity, delivering his speech with a charismatic, almost theatrical grace. His voice, warm and commanding, drew every eye and ear in the room. Unity, he said, doesn't mean we all agree. It means we're willing to listen. Thunderous applause followed. Phones were held high. Live streams popped up across social media. The world was watching. Meanwhile, in the dim shadows of the back row, Jonathan Roumie, the actor known less for politics and more for his quiet moral presence, sat almost invisible. He was not on the guest list. He was not expected. And he most certainly was not welcome. For a while, he remained unnoticed, a shadow among shadows, until he stood. The soft creak of his chair turned a few heads. A student near the aisle whispered, astonished, "Wait, is that Jonathan Roumie?" Security at the back tensed. Hands touched radios. Movement was subtle but alert. On stage, Robert Downey Jr. continued, still unaware of the ripple that had begun to stir beneath the polished elegance of his words. Roumie stepped into the aisle. The soft tap of his leather boots on the wooden floor echoed across the auditorium like a steady heartbeat or a warning. Eyes shifted. Whispers gave way to tension. The atmosphere thickened like the stillness before a storm. An event staffer near the stage discreetly gestured for security to move. Then, silence. Downey Jr. paused, scanning the room. His gaze locked onto the figure approaching the front. Murmurs began to swell like ocean waves. In the middle row, a student shakily held up a phone to record. Her fingers trembled. Downey Jr., ever calm, tilted his head and spoke with charm but firmness. "Sir, I'm afraid you're not on the list. I'm going to have to ask you to step out so we can continue." The words were polished, polite on the surface, yet unmistakably final. Two guards in black moved quietly from either side of the hall, but Jonathan Roumie did not turn back. He walked slowly, not with defiance, but with unwavering calm, toward a spare microphone near the stage. Some students rose to their feet, cheering. Others hissed and groaned. A professor in the front row gripped the printed program with growing unease. Roumie reached the microphone. He gently flipped the switch. Click. A single sound that shattered the weighted silence like a blade through glass. He looked toward Downey Jr., eyes clear, voice steady, warm, but sharp. "Mr. Downey, I didn't come here to ruin your well-dressed evening, but when you speak of unity, I believe there's something important being left out, and I'd like a chance to say it." Gasps, laughter, and scattered claps rippled through the audience. In the third row, a girl turned to her friend and whispered, eyes blazing, "He actually said it." Downey Jr. remained still, arms crossed, gaze sharp. Then, with a subtle gesture, he signaled the security to hold off. He wanted to see where this was going. Roumie reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn, folded paper. His voice filled the hall, not loud, but powerful. "These students, the ones who first invited me here, they're the ones who felt silenced. They didn't ask for a performance, they asked for honesty, but your organizers, afraid it might stain the script, withdrew the invitation." He paused, lifted his eyes again. "So tell me, Mr. Downey, what kind of unity is that?" The hall erupted again, beesh, applause and boos in equal measure. A student in glasses stood up and shouted, "Speak, Jonathan, speak!" From a corner of the auditorium, someone muttered under their breath, "So disrespectful." The student journalism team's cameras panned slowly, capturing every detail. Jonathan Roumie's calm but unshakable expression, then Robert Downey Jr.'s composed but wary gaze, and finally the crowd, now pulsing with emotion, as if history were unfolding live. Roumie stood tall at the microphone. His eyes swept across the room, not with defiance, but with a gentle, unwavering gaze, as if speaking to each heart one by one. His voice slowed, each word carefully placed, deliberate and heavy with purpose. "I didn't come here to cause a scene or to stir scandal. I didn't come to divide or disrupt, but if unity only means hearing what makes us comfortable, if unity is just a polished silence, hiding truth beneath applause, then that's not unity at all. That's control. It's censorship dressed in eloquence." His words struck like silent arrows, not loud, not violent, but piercing. Some students now leapt to their feet, clapping with visible relief, as though someone had finally voiced what they'd long held inside. Others sat frozen, red-faced, visibly agitated, unable or unwilling to absorb the reality Roumie laid bare. The room crackled with tension, a strange electricity that made even the quietest breath feel loud. It was not outrage, it was revelation. He took a breath, one deep and steady, and met Downey Jr.'s eyes again. This time his tone softened, warmer, hopeful. We can disagree, we can debate, we can even oppose each other with passion, but let's not build walls out of our differences. Let's build bridges, bridges of understanding, of respect. That was his true unity. Unity founded not on comfort, but on truth and freedom. Silence. For a moment, the entire auditorium held its breath. Then, applause, not just from his supporters, but also from a few who had opposed him moments earlier. As if the power of those words was simply undeniable. Downey Jr., still at the podium, gave a faint smile, but behind it something flickered. A tension in the eyes, a calculation. He stepped to the main microphone. His voice, as always, was smooth, calm but laced with resistance. Mr. Roumie, I respect your convictions, but this is a space for organized dialogue. If you want to debate, there are proper venues. This, he gestured around the room, was meant to be a conversation, not a disruption. Half the room applauded, polite, supportive, orderly. But Jonathan Roumie didn't move. His expression remained steady. He leaned into the microphone again. With all due respect, sir. A pause, a slight knowing smile, not arrogant, but grounded. If you decide who gets to speak and who must stay silent, then that's not dialogue. That's a script, and I'm not an actor in your play. The auditorium burst into sound, cheers, boos, and laughter, all colliding in a raw surge. Security inched closer. Roumie didn't flinch. He gripped the microphone gently but firmly, standing still, calm in the storm. On stage, Downey Jr. remained composed, outwardly, but his hands now subtly gripped the lectern. Security exchanged glances, awaiting a cue, but Downey said nothing. And so Roumie continued, voice now quieter, but cutting deeper. You speak of unity, and who wouldn't want that? But when unity comes at the cost of silencing one side, is it really unity? Or is it just obedience? Another eruption, applause, shouting, and sharp whistles of protest. You planned this event, he continued, holding up the now crumpled invitation letter. You handpicked the guests, filtered the questions. But these students, these brave students, they asked for a real conversation. They asked for me, and you said no, because the truth doesn't fit your script. The room flared again, like a fire catching wind. Some students rose, hands clapping fiercely under the golden light. Others remained seated, their faces tight with frustration. Roumie's voice lowered, like a fireside storyteller, drawing the audience in, not commanding, but inviting. Unity isn't when we all nod in agreement. It isn't when we pretend our differences don't exist. True unity is the courage to listen to the voices that make us uncomfortable, to hear the truth, even when it hurts. Because without that, what you call unity is just tyranny in a fine suit. And tyranny wears many faces, but always fears the truth. A moment of silence, then a wave of clashing reaction, thunderous applause from one side, defiant boos from the other. In the front row, an elderly professor with white hair scribbled in a notebook, his hand trembling slightly, not from age, but from the weight of the moment. Downey Jr. stepped forward again. His voice was warm, almost fatherly, but sharpened by unease. Mr. Roumie, I believe in free expression. I agree. Debate is essential. But this, disrupting an event, seizing the microphone, this is not the way. Not if we truly want to build something lasting. Scattered claps followed, but Roumie only smiled. That same quiet, unwavering smile. Not of mockery, but of a man who has seen too much of silence. He didn't speak, not yet. But in his gaze, you could almost hear him say, "Let me keep going." Jonathan Roumie turned slightly, his voice now carrying a delicate balance of grace, mockery, and conviction. Funny, isn't it? When an ordinary person dares to speak the uncomfortable, you call it disruption. But when silence is imposed in the name of order, you call it peace. Well, I don't call this disruption. I call it truth. And truth has never been easy. It makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes it even makes them run. The auditorium erupted once more, louder and more chaotic than before. Some students cheered, some shouted in anger. Applause clashed with groans. The very air seemed to tighten around the room, thick with unspoken emotions. At the side of the stage, an event organizer's face flushed with anxiety. She leaned in toward a nearby security guard. whispering urgently, clearly intending to intervene. But Robert Downey Jr., still on the podium, raised his hand. Subtle, yet decisive. He wanted to hear it all. Sensing the shift, Roumie lifted his voice again. This time it burned. I'm not standing here to be a hero. And I'm not here to cause chaos. I'm standing here for them. He gestured to the rows of young faces watching him, eyes wide and alert. These students, their future, they deserve truth, not a curated narrative. If truth feels like a threat, then the problem isn't the speaker. The problem is the fear of facing it. His words rushed through the hall like a cleansing storm, stripping away the polished decorum and exposing something raw, something real. Perhaps in that moment, this was democracy in its purest form. Not pleasant, not rehearsed, but powerful, honest. A young man in a Yale hoodie stood up, fist raised in the air. Near the front, a girl held up her phone, eyes glistening with tears as she recorded. The student journalism team's cameras panned between faces. The crowd, Downey's steady gaze, Roumie's calm stance, capturing history as it unfolded. A teaching assistant leaned over to a colleague and whispered, This is going to be big. Sensing security drawing closer, Roumie stepped back slightly, but still held onto the microphone. Then, with the clarity of a church bell ringing at dawn, he said, just one last thing. His voice now clear, resolute, a proclamation. If unity means silence before truth, I'd rather be escorted out than bow my head. He gently set the microphone down. Click, a final sound like a full stop carved into stone. Security moved in. One guard approached, respectfully taking Roumie by the arm, leading him toward a side exit. The crowd split in two. One half thundered with applause, the other half booed with demands for order. As Roumie disappeared behind the stage door, a chant broke out in the back rows. Speak freely, speak freely. Phones across the auditorium lit up. Videos spread within seconds. One student tweeted, Jonathan Roumie just shook Yale to its core. A 15-second clip. The line, unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit, was shared hundreds of times in minutes. Robert Downey Jr. remained motionless at the podium. His eyes followed the aisle where Roumie had just walked. His face was composed, but behind the stillness, contemplation brewed. The viral aftermath hours later, the atmosphere outside Woolsey Hall remained electric, like sparks leaping off hot iron. Groups of students gathered in clusters, arguing passionately. Phones glowed with freshly recorded clips. The 22-second video of Roumie's final words had gone viral, lighting up social media like wildfire. News outlets reacted instantly. Fox News, Jonathan Roumie challenges Downey, defends free speech at Yale. CNN, actor hijacks unity event in political stunt. MSNBC analyst, this wasn't free speech, it was theatrical disruption. On TikTok, reactions exploded. A Yale student with green hair posted a stitched clip with the caption, He's right, if only voices that align are allowed. That's not unity, that's control. It hit 1 million views in under an hour, but not everyone agreed. Another student posted, he disrupted a safe space. Downey deserved respect. The comments section turned into a battlefield of clashing beliefs. In response to the escalating storm, Robert Downey Jr. released a statement that evening. Unity requires dialogue, but also order. We can debate without derailing each other. The post earned thousands of likes, and also replies like, your order is just censorship in better packaging. The controversy spilled beyond Yale. Cafes around campus echoed with debate. At Book Trader Cafe, students huddled over phones, replaying Roumie's moment. He said what no one else would, someone murmured. Another scoffed. It was just a show for clicks. Then, a twist. A Yale student claiming to be part of the original group that invited Roumie posted a lengthy thread. They pressured us to withdraw the invitation, said he'd destabilize the event. But destabilize what? Their control? The post went viral. Journalists took notice. The Atlantic published a full piece titled, Yale's Moment of Reckoning, Free Speech and the Roumie Disruption. On TikTok, a trend was born. Students recorded themselves standing at fake podiums, reciting Roumie's words. One video from a Berkeley student featured the caption, If truth is disruption, then I choose disruption. The video clip of Jonathan Roumie's final line, Unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit, spread like wildfire. It was everywhere. Millions watched it, shared it, echoed it. Commentators across platforms began calling it the Roumie moment. Not just a protest, not just a disruption, but a symbol. A quiet rebellion against ideological control dressed as polite consensus. At Yale, the intellectual tremors began. One professor wrote on the university's blog, "This event reveals something we must confront. We need to rethink how we host dialogue in our institutions." But not all agreed. Another faculty member, in a podcast episode titled "Disruption or Dialogue," called Roumie's actions irresponsible, arguing that he derailed a chance for genuine conversation. Both perspectives gained traction, and so did the fire. Across the internet, the hashtag #SpeakFreely caught momentum. People began sharing personal stories of being silenced at school, at work, online. "I was fired for voicing an unpopular opinion. Roumie spoke for me. My school banned conservative speakers." This isn't unity, it's fear. These stories were like stones tossed into still water, creating ripples that refused to fade. The media storm that began at Wolsey Hall didn't settle. It swelled into a national blaze, leaping from TikTok to classrooms, phone screens to podiums. Within days, college campuses across America were trembling. Campus uprising. At Stanford, students occupied the main quad holding banners that read, "Free speech or nothing." They hosted an open mic where everyone could speak, from conservatives to progressives. One engineering student, voice trembling but unyielding, shared how a professor told him to stay on message or leave the discussion. His testimony went viral with thousands of comments. "Speak Freely is for people like him." At Berkeley, known for its student activism, the movement exploded. Hundreds marched through Sproul Plaza chanting, "Let us speak." An online petition demanding transparency in guest speaker policies gathered over 10,000 signatures in a single week. On the steps of the administration building, a senior student shouted, "If Yale can silence Jonathan Roumie, who's next?" The clip of her declaration became a rallying cry. Roumie's silence, louder than words. Through it all, Jonathan Roumie remained silent. He refused interviews. He declined TV appearances. He was seen only once, in a grainy, blurry video, leaving a local grocery store in Louisiana, wearing a soft half smile, hands in his coat pockets. That absence became mythic. A viral post summed it up. "Roumie doesn't need to go on camera. He lit the spark. Now we keep it burning." The post included photos of student-led protests at UCLA, University of Michigan, Texas A&M. Downey responds. Feeling the heat of the movement, Robert Downey Jr. broke his silence in a brief podcast interview. His tone was calm, diplomatic. "I believe in open dialogue, but we need spaces where people feel safe to engage." The Yale incident sparked important questions, but unity remains the goal. His words were praised by some, dismissed by others as evasive. "Nice words," one tweet read, "but you still shut the door when it mattered." Beyond the universities, the movement spread past college campuses. At high schools, students began challenging their own school's censorship policies. A group in Chicago held a virtual symposium inspired by Roumie. They invited controversial figures, hosted debate nights. A 16-year-old girl said, "If adults are afraid to debate, then we will." Her video, shared on TikTok, hit millions of views within hours. Institutions began to shift. Universities began to yield. Stanford announced an open forum policy, inviting speakers from all ideological backgrounds. Berkeley revised its guest selection process for transparency. NYU held free speech workshops, though some faculty opposed them, calling the movement destabilizing. A Yale professor, writing for the Chronicle of Higher Education, admitted, "We've grown too comfortable controlling the narrative." Pushback and accusations. Still, not everyone supported Roumie. A group of Yale students held a press conference apologizing for what happened. "We believe in unity, not division," one said, but online commenters ridiculed them. Apologizing for truth? That's cowardice. Unity that can't withstand truth isn't unity, it's weakness. Other critics accused Roumie of manipulating students, pushing a hidden conservative agenda. But the growing crowds didn't care. The wave had already risen. Legal threats and lasting symbols. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Just days after the Yale incident, a group of lawyers representing the event's organizers sent Roumie a warning letter. He was accused of trespassing, disturbing public order. A media outlet ran the headline, "Roumie may face lawsuit for disrupting Downey event." No formal charges emerged, but the backlash sparked fierce public debate. "They're trying to silence Roumie with the law," one user wrote. "He brought it on himself," another replied. "He wasn't invited." Yet, even amid controversy, Jonathan Roumie didn't blink. He remained still, silent. while the movement he had sparked kept roaring forward. Meanwhile, the Yale students who had originally invited Jonathan Roumie began facing repercussions. One, under growing pressure from the administration, resigned from the student council. Another, a young woman who had spoken in Roumie's defense, began receiving anonymous threatening messages, prompting her to temporarily lock all her accounts. But they weren't alone. A small but determined group of Yale students organized a silent rally just days later, holding a banner in front of our Sterling Memorial Library that read, "Truth doesn't need permission." The photo of the banner shared on social media ignited a new wave of solidarity, inspiring student groups at NYU, Texas A&M, and beyond. Roumie, silent, steadfast, and unshaken. Despite the chaos, Jonathan Roumie never backed down, nor did he strike back. In one of the few candid moments caught on video, a reporter approached him outside a church in Baton Rouge. When asked if he regretted what happened at Yale, Roumie gave a faint shrug and replied, "Regret? I just said what needed saying. The rest is up to others to decide." The remark, brief, sharp, sincere, became a new rallying slogan, printed on t-shirts, posters, and placards at protests across the country. Even as legal threats and personal attacks intensified, Roumie and the student-led Speak Freely movement stood firm. What had begun as a single moment of defiance at a carefully controlled event had now become a national reckoning, a turning point, a moment when thousands of young people quietly decided, "We will not stay silent anymore." 1 year later, the flame still burns. A year after the incident at Yale, Jonathan Roumie's name was no longer just that of an actor. He had become a symbol of moral courage and fearless honesty in a cultural landscape starving for authenticity. The Speak Freely movement, born in that single moment when Roumie took the mic, left an indelible mark on both college campuses and the national conversation around speech. It wasn't a passing controversy. It became a case study, a movement, a generation's awakening. Universities, long bastions of scripted conversations and ideological insulation, began to shift. Harvard launched a free-form initiative, allowing students to invite any speaker, regardless of political or philosophical stance, without administrative pre-approval. Berkeley implemented new guidelines demanding transparency in how public speakers were selected. Even smaller institutions like Amherst hosted unfiltered debate nights, where students openly confronted opposing views in real time. An Amherst student wrote in the school paper, "We're no longer afraid of disagreement. That's the real lesson from Yale." A slogan that became a doctrine. Roumie's line, "Unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit," became the enduring phrase of a generation. It appeared in political science textbooks, was embossed on the covers of essay collections on free speech, and adorned the walls of student union halls across America. A Stanford professor, addressing his freshmen, held up a poster with Roumie's quote and said, "This isn't just rhetoric. It's a reminder that truth, even when uncomfortable, is the foundation of real dialogue." The man who wouldn't step into the spotlight. And yet, despite it all, Jonathan Roumie remained distant from the spotlight. He rarely mentioned Yale in public. When the media pressed him, he gave only quiet, almost rustic replies. "I just said what I saw. You young folks did the rest." The simplicity of that answer, recorded and uploaded by a student, only further cemented his image as a humble torchbearer, someone who didn't chase attention, but accidentally ignited a fire. Downey's shift. Even Robert Downey Jr., the polished face of the original event, began to shift his stance. At an education summit 6 months later, he said, "We grow the most when we engage ideas that make us uncomfortable." He never mentioned Roumie directly, but to many it was a subtle acknowledgement of the truth that had upended his stage. Some applauded, others remained skeptical. "Nice words," one student wrote, "but will you listen next time it's not scripted?" From classrooms to the culture war. The Yale incident became a core subject in college classrooms, political science courses, media ethics classes, and communications departments, and all dissected the moment in depth. One professor at NYU launched an entire elective called Free Speech in the Digital Age. A student blogged afterward, "Yale taught me something I never expected. One voice, one moment can shake an entire system." Ripples beyond the campus. The movement didn't stop at academia. Tech companies, long accused of shadow banning and content bias, started hosting free expression workshops. Nonprofits launched initiatives to support censored voices. One project called Mic for All, founded by Yale alumni, gave anyone a platform to share thoughts without fear of deletion. The platform, inspired by Roumie's act, quickly gained thousands of users. Not without resistance. Not every institution welcomed the change. Some universities pushed back. Faculty members questioned whether free speech should override emotional safety. The debate continued. A New York Times article summed it up. The Yale incident was a cultural wake-up call. We cannot build unity by silencing dissent. The final image Roumie never responded to the legal threats. He never addressed the fame. He didn't cash in. But at a Texas university, an anonymous student painted a mural. Roumie at the microphone, eyes lifted, the words, "Speak freely," scrawled behind him. When a reporter asked what he thought of it, Roumie just smiled and replied, "I look better in real life," and walked away. That quiet humor, paired with his deep resolve, helped Jonathan Roumie's legacy endure. As universities became more open and students more fearless in speaking the truth, the Yale incident was no longer viewed as just a disruption. It was a turning point, a shift in how schools conducted debate, a spark that rekindled an old belief. Truth, however uncomfortable, is always worth fighting for. In the new free forums emerging across the country, Roumie's spirit, humble but unyielding, quietly led the way. What began in Woolsey Hall rippled outward like a stone thrown into water, endlessly, powerfully, permanently. 1 year later, the dust had long settled. But the story, Jonathan Roumie standing up, speaking out, facing down the lights and pressure, had become legend. It wasn't just a memory, it was a reminder. The power of voice, the cost of silence. The Speak Freely movement had redrawn the boundaries of student life and public discourse. But it left behind a question for everyone. When pressure hits, what will you choose? A new generation steps forward. 1 year after it all began, at a newly formed free forum at Yale, a freshman stepped nervously to the microphone. Her hands shook slightly as she looked out at the crowd. Unfamiliar faces, silent eyes. "In class," she said, "they told me to stay quiet because my view didn't align and I was scared." Her voice carried through the speakers. But then I remembered someone who stood right here, someone who spoke even when the whole room wanted him quiet. Silence fell. Then applause erupted. Not for her alone, but for the echo of Roumie's stand still resonating in that hall. "Unity," she added, as Mr. Downey once said, "is a noble ideal. But what kind of unity demands we swallow our convictions? What kind of unity silences truth?" That was the question Roumie had forced the nation to confront. He didn't provide the answer. He left it for each person, each student, each teacher, each viewer to find it for themselves, beyond Yale's walls. Inspired by the moment, a high school teacher in Ohio began allowing students to openly debate even the most controversial issues. No topic was off limits. From Louisiana to New York, the ripple continued. And though the microphones were turned off and the hashtags slowed, the question remained. It wasn't just for Yale, it was for you. For anyone who would one day stand in a moment of pressure. When silence is easy, when speaking feels like defiance, what will you do? Will you bow your head, or will you step forward, even trembling, and speak? Roumie's legacy, the story of Jonathan Roumie, a man with no script, no agenda, only conviction, had come to symbolize something larger than any debate. He stepped up, not for attention, not for ideology, but because he believed truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. His now iconic line, "Unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit," became the foundation for a new kind of discourse. One where discomfort was no longer an excuse for silence. From social media to society, the Speak Freely movement, born from that quiet storm, reached beyond Yale. It echoed across social media. It sparked policy changes at Stanford, Berkeley, Amherst. It exposed how even safe spaces can become stages for control. But it also showed the cost of truth. Roumie faced criticism. The students who stood with him faced threats. The institutions that resisted were forced to reckon with dissent. Yet the lesson endured. In today's America, where speech is both a right and a battleground, courage is the currency of truth. Roumie, with his quiet conviction and worn leather boots, taught a generation that the microphone is always there, even when no one hands it to you. Final reflection. So when the moment comes at work, in school, in family, in life, and you feel the weight of silence pressing down, will you stay silent or will you dare to speak, even if only in your heart? The answer is yours, and yours alone. YouTube outro text. If this story moved you, if the Speak Freely message resonated in your soul, subscribe to the channel to keep the flame alive. Share the story. Speak your truth. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.